All right, so this week we begin talking about two of the more difficult jobs in the control room. We start talking about two of the more difficult jobs in the control room, audio and technical directing. The two most complex pieces of equipment in the control room really are the audio board and the video switcher, although some of the software can be quite complicated with graphics, okay? But we're going to spend some time talking about how the machines work, all right? And we're going to begin with audio. And here's why we're going to spend so much time talking about how an audio board works. If you can figure out how one audio board works, you have just learned how all audio boards work. How many of you can drive a car? I bet you can probably drive a pickup truck. I bet you could probably drive a minivan because it's, hey, you hop in and you go, hey, look, steering wheel, brake, gas, I'm good. Okay, but even with a little bit of practice, I bet you guys could probably drive a U-Haul, maybe even a 38-foot truck with a little bit of practice, maybe, right? So listen, if you understand how an audio board works, you should theoretically be able to sit down in front of any audio board and figure it out, okay? Listen, never be intimidated by a piece of equipment. I don't care how many buttons and lights and flashy things it's got on it. It's a machine. You got this? So you walk into ESPN and you sit down in the control room and they've got some ginormous thing. And you're like, oh, well, that's a 4ME switcher. That thing costs $500,000 and it's all of a sudden like your brain just like left the building. You sit down and you go, oh, I get it. Okay, there's this. Click, click. Makes sense? So pay attention to how these things work. And it doesn't matter if you have an audio board that's this big or from here to the wall. All right, so let's talk about audio boards. What is an audio board? It is a box. An audio board is a box. It's a box. And flowing or wired into the box are lines of audio that are connected in. These are your inputs. Inputs, input, output, inputs. Each line that flows in is coming from a source. It's coming from a source. And when we were in the control room the last time, we talked a little bit about this. What are some of the sources of audio that are wired in? What do you got? Give me one. Mics, okay, your studio mics. Each microphone represents one line. Mic number 1, mic number 2, and so forth, okay? Mic 3, mic 4, mic 5, mic 6, mic 7, mic 8, however many you have. Each mic would have its own line. What else is wired in? Okay, like a microwave truck, right? A microwave truck. So you've got a reporter and a shooter out on location someplace, and I'm looking into a camera, I'm speaking into a microphone, but the audio signal and the video signal are being encoded and shot back to the station on a line of sight connection called a microwave connection. Now sometimes it's a ricochet, but more often than not it's a line of sight, okay? A microwave truck is going to be sending back an audio signal that is 2 lines. So for short, a microwave truck is MX, left, MX right, channel 1, channel 2. Okay, hold the phone. Hold the phone. Long ears, hold the phone. Why is a microphone 1 line and that microwave truck 2 lines? No, it's just the audio. Just the audio, but you're on kind of on the right track. Yeah.
Well, mic would be mono, and the microwave signal is stereo.
Bingo. What we are dealing with is the difference between a mono source and a stereo source. So before we go too much further, we're going to have to figure out what's the difference between mono and stereo, right? Okay, what about a CD player? What would you guess, mono or stereo? A CD player, mono or stereo? Stereo. Stereo. A CD player is stereo. How about your iPod? Stereo. Your iPhone? Stereo. Okay, so things like CD players, stuff with theme music in it, right? You know, the theme music to Jeopardy, do 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 do. Well, CD player, left, right, channel 1, channel 2. An iPod or anything else like that would be represented in the same fashion. But let's talk about mono and stereo just for a minute. Mono means one unique, individual, distinct channel of audio. One unique, individual, distinct channel of audio. One unique, individual, distinct channel of audio. Stereo, the definition of stereo, two unique, individual, distinct channels of audio. So if I was going to draw it, a mono signal looks like this, just one line, all right? A stereo signal is what? Two parallel lines, sometimes called left and right, sometimes called channel 1, channel 2. How many of you guys have ever hooked up a DVD player or anything like that to your TV set, and you got the wires, right, you know, and one of them's yellow, and that's supposed to be for video, right? Then you got the white one, that's one channel of audio, and then you got the red one for the other channel. Makes sense? It's a stereo device. Now, the thing about stereo is that it's two separate, distinct, unique channels. So if I had a stereo in here, I would have essentially two speakers in front of me. I would have a speaker on the left and a speaker on the right. And what's coming out of that speaker is different than what's coming out of that one. Have you ever noticed that in your headphones? Dun, 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 dun. Sometimes it's the same. Thump, thump, thump. You ever notice that? Yeah, that means you're listening to stereo. Okay? Mono, though, a microphone generates a mono signal. Mono is one unique, individual, distinct channel. If I was listening simply to a perfect mono setup, how many speakers would I have? One, and where would it be? In the center. Does that make sense? But most of us don't have that type of a setup. Most of us have a stereo setup. Many of you have quadraphonic or surround sound, etc. So when you're listening to a mono signal on a stereo system, all they do is split it. Does that make sense? They split it. And now you have what? Two identical channels of audio. Does that make sense? Two unique, individual, distinct, two identical. There's a difference. This is called a mono split or fake stereo. Okay, so what's coming out of that speaker is exactly the same as what's coming out of that speaker. Do you follow that idea? It's important to understand that because some sources are going to, microphones are mono sources, but pretty much everything else is going to be a stereo source. But look out, there are quadraphonic sources. There are quadraphonic sources, which means it's going to be putting out how many channels? 4 individual, distinct, unique channels of audio. Does that make sense? And so that type of source would have 4 incoming lines. Yeah?
How common are like quadraphonics?
How common? Not very. I'd say you run into that maybe once out of 100 times. Okay? So 1 chance in 100 that you're going to hit a quadraphonic source. A lot of times you might have a source that's quadraphonic capable, but you're only using 2 lines. Does that make sense? But it really depends. Most production is handled mono stereo. Most production's handled mono stereo. Okay? All right, so each incoming line, and remember, we've got what? Besides the microwave, besides the CD player, we could have a server. We could have an audio server. That would be a stereo input. We could have our playback devices, DDRA, channel 1, channel 2, left and right. A DDR is a digital disc recorder. I showed you that, I think, the big giant flash drive, big super ginormous flash drive, right? It's just a playback device. So if you had some pre-recorded video of Serena Williams losing the other day, you know, you could actually show that video clip and you'd have the audio would be wired in as well. All right, now, the way I like to think about this, I'm going to give you an example that may seem a little cornball, but it actually works really well. So just stay with me on this. Think of audio like water. Think of audio like water. Each line is an incoming stream. An incoming stream flowing into a lake of audio, all right? A lake of audio. So really think about it like water, because audio flows like water, audio mixes like liquids do, all right? It mixes together like liquids do. And so that's what's going on here. The audio board itself is where the audio is flowing in and mixing together. Does that make sense? And then flowing out of your lake, ready? Flowing out of the lake is one river. A river of audio, okay? And so it happens to be a stereo river, just so you know. It's a stereo river, and that river has a name. It's called audio program. Audio program. An audio program is the final mix. It's the final mix. It's the audio that's being recorded. If you go home, sit down, and turn on the TV set, you are listening to audio program. Make sense? That's what you're listening to. It's the final output. So audio program is a stereo river. Now, the cool thing about it is that we can keep going with this idea of audio as water. Each incoming stream has its own little dam. It has a dam. Each incoming stream has a dam on it. And so you can adjust the flow of the incoming streams of audio. You can let it flow at 100%, 50%, 10%, or you can shut off the flow, 0% flow. Does that make sense? So you have individual control on each stream, each line. So I could have microphone 1 all the way open at 100% flow, and I could have the rest of them what? Shut at 0, and so the only thing you're going to hear is what? Mic 1. But the river has a dam on it too. The river has a dam on it as well. So if you really think about this audio as water idea, it is possible, it's possible that you could open up all of these to 100% full incoming flow. But if this is shut, will you hear anything? No, you won't. You'll have a very full lake, but you're not going to hear anything. Now, if you want to hear something, you're going to have to do what? Open this up. All right? So now if you follow the idea, what if this is wide open 100%, but all of these are closed? Will you hear anything? No, you won't even hear static, hopefully. You'll hear nothing because you have an empty lake, right? There's nothing in the lake. You can open this up as wide as you want. If you have an empty lake, you're not going to get anything flowing out. Makes sense? Yes, no, blank? Now, all audio boards are set up just like this. Now, I've only put up here what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 inputs. All right, well, there are audio boards with 16 inputs, 32 inputs, 64 inputs, 128 inputs, 256 inputs, 512 inputs, and so 1024 inputs. So what's happening? The audio board's getting what? Longer. That's it. So when you walk in and you see an audio board that's gigantic, don't freak out. You just go, what? Oh, wow, that can handle a lot of incoming streams of audio. That's all it means. The bigger the audio board, the more streams it can handle. Just start in your head drawing more lines, right? This is an 8-line example, but you might have one in front of you that's huge, and you just go, oh, well, it can handle 1,000 inputs or 2,000 inputs. Whoopee. Okay? Never be intimidated by a piece of equipment. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to draw this part bigger. All right, I'm going to draw this part bigger. And that'll take just a second. While I'm doing that, does anyone have any questions about what I've covered so far? Yeah?
How many inputs is about standard?
Standard? Probably 32. But people buy audio boards anticipating what they're going to use it for, right? And so if you're buying an audio board for a theater, like the Jorgensen Theater at UConn, okay, sometimes you're doing theatrical productions, but sometimes you're doing musical productions where you might have more than 32 inputs, right? So if you were buying a board for the Jorgensen, you'd probably want to buy something bigger than what you think you're going to need so that you would have extra space. Because what happens if a choir shows up or an orchestra and every single instrument has its own mic? right? Every violin, every clarinet, if every single instrument had its own mic, you would need to have what? A pretty big audio board, right? Does that make sense? Now, normally you don't give every single instrument their own microphone, but you could do it that way. You could do it that way. But let's look at the box. Yeah, go ahead.
I should know if there's like an extension or like you can add on to the board.
Where you can just buy more?
Yeah.
Some of the computerized boards, it's unlimited because it's not a real board, it's a virtual board. Do you follow that idea? And so it doesn't care, right? I mean, there's probably a theoretical software limit, like 999, that they put in there. But if it's a virtual board, then no, you're really not limited. And you can put in as many tracks as you want. So an input's kind of like a track. Yeah.
Can you like substitute two smaller audio boards for one larger one, or do you have to have like one to handle all the inputs?
Well, what you would wind up with is what? Would you have two audio programs? Which one are you going to record? Which one are you listening to? Does that make sense? So combining two small audio boards would not really do what you want it to in the basic sense. Although you could do that for a special effect if you wanted to. You'd have to have the synchronization perfect, but you could use one audio board to handle audio program left and one audio board to handle audio program right. But again, the synchronization would have to be perfect to the millisecond. Otherwise, you'd get this weird offset. Other questions about what I've covered so far? All right, so let's take a look at it real big. And I'm not very happy with these markers today. I think I probably need to get some new markers in here. Let's go to blue. Is blue any better? Not really. Let me go see if I can find a better one. Just give me a second. Put yourself on pause. Take a deep breath. It's funny, normally I have like 15 of those things floating around. I think there might be one in post-production. Hang on. They all dried out. Is there a good Sharpie, is there a good marker in here? Give me the two black ones. Just, thanks. I have two more options, so let's see if one of these works. All right, so when you look at an audio board, what you'll notice is that it's divided into a bunch of fader strips. Fader strips. And so a fader strip looks kind of like this. They're vertical. They're approximately the same size. They start on the left and they move to the right. All right? And they kind of look like this. You have a little slider with a little knob, a slider spot, These are called fader knobs. Fader strip, fader knob. And they're just duplicates. They all look exactly the same. So an audio board with lots and lots and lots and lots of inputs is going to have what? Lots and lots and lots and lots of fader strips. That's what makes them so big. Okay? Each fader strip handles one incoming line. All right? Each fader strip handles one incoming line. So, and they label them. It's not like you have to guess. Okay, so this one might say microphone number 1, microphone number 2. Let's say DDRA channel 1, DDRA channel 2. Let's say CD player channel 1, CD player channel 2, and so forth. Does that make sense? So refresh my memory again. Why does the CD player get 2? It's stereo. The microphone gets 1? Mono. All right, cool. Then over here on the right-hand side, you're going to have another fader strip, but it's all the way on the right. Okay, it's all the way on the right. And typically, the fader knob is going to be red. Okay, the fader knob is going to be red, or simply a different color than these. These will typically be white or gray, sometimes black. That sucker's usually like red. Okay. What do you think this one controls?
All of them?
What?
All of them?
Nope. What does it control? Well, in a way it does. Be more specific.
Like what comes out?
Yeah, it's audio program. All right, this one is controlling audio program. Now hang on a minute, Utterback. You said audio program is stereo. You said it's stereo, and there's only one knob. What's the deal? Well, guess what? You're controlling both at the same time with one knob. All right? Simply, they tie it together. They assume that you want to control both sides at the exact same percentages. Do you follow me on that? Any boogering around with putting some stuff on the left channel and some stuff on the right channel, you do all that upstream. You do all your messing around upstream. By the time you hit the output, you're not messing around anymore. You just want to handle your output. So even though it's one fader knob, you're handling 2 channels, but it's audio program. It's the final output. Okay? Making sense? Fader strips, fader knobs. Yes?
But all those have to be down, and then you put the one up, or like, can you have them all different?
Well, though, it depends on what you want. Okay? If you want microphone 1, you would have microphone 1 up. The rest of these would be down, and you would have this one up. So microphone 1 is flowing in and flowing out. So these guys are, these are the dams. These are the dams. This is controlling incoming flow. This is controlling output, outgoing flow. Make sense? Yeah.
Well, like, you see how your black line is obviously smaller than the whole strip?
Yeah.
Would it be able to go all the way up there, or is there like buttons on top of it and stuff?
Oh, what's on top?
Yeah.
Just a minute. I'm going to draw one fader strip real big. Yeah.
Is it common for the audio guy to set all of his levels before and then use mutes?
Yes and no. Yes and no. It depends. If you want to cut on at full strength, then yeah. But sometimes you don't want to cut on at full strength. Sometimes you want to fade up and fade out, as opposed to cut in and cut out. Make sense? All right. Is everybody clear on this part? Do you have any more questions about this as I've drawn it? As it has been drawn. All right, so when the knob is up, you've got what? Signal flow. You're allowing it to flow into your lake. If the knob is down, the dam is closed, and you're not allowing it to flow in. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw one fader strip just really, really, really big. All right, because they're all the same. They're all the same. One ginormous fader strip. All right, so there's the fader strip. This is the fader knob. And right now it's about halfway up, right? What else will you see on a fader strip? And that's what you were talking about. There's a lot of other stuff on a fader strip, okay? A lot of other stuff. At the very top of the fader strip, you will have a knob. Now, before I go on, I have to explain how I draw things. This is a knob. That is something you turn left and right. Something you turn. A button looks like that. And a button is something you do what with? You push it. You turn it or push it. Make sense? At the top, you're going to have a knob. At the top, you're going to have a knob. And it'll be labeled in a couple of different ways, but more often than not, it'll be labeled gain. Okay, gain. Gain. Now, sometimes it's labeled mic line, so it'll be labeled mic / line like that. So that's an alternative. So if you see mic / line, listen, it's the button on the top, or the button, it's the knob on the top. It's the knob on the top, all right? It's always on the top. Does anybody know what gain does?
Controls voltage.
Yes. Voltage of what?
The incoming signal.
Voltage of the incoming signal. So, let's say you hook up a microphone. Let's say you hook up a microphone, and the person you hooked up the microphone to is talking in their normal speaking voice, and the signal's not real strong. It's not real strong. How could you increase the signal strength? What do you think you would do? The gain, yeah. So if this knob here was all the way up at 100% flow and it wasn't strong enough, you could go up to your gain and do what? Turn it. But be aware that this amplification is like really aggressive. The stepping is very high. So if you turn it like one little bit, you're actually jumping like 10. Does that make sense? All right, so it's just stepped very, very high. So I just introduced a concept, though. I said signal strength. Signal strength. So let's talk about signal strength for a minute. If gain is allowing you to adjust signal strength, we need to know what signal strength is. All right? Now, signal strength is one way that you can measure an audio signal. Quite literally, signal strength is measuring voltage. It's measuring the flow of the electrons. It literally is measuring the flow of the electrons that represent that audio signal. But you're right, it's voltage. It's voltage. And so, signal strength, the only way to know what your signal strength is, you can't use your ears. You have to use what? How do you think you measure signal strength? What do you have to use? If you can't use your ears, you're going to use what? Your nose? A voltage meter of some kind, right? Yeah, you're going to use a meter. The only way to measure signal strength is with a meter or a gauge of some kind. So when you're in your car, how do you know how much gas you've got in the tank? What do you look at? The gas gauge, right? You look at the gas gauge. Well, the only way to know how much signal strength you have is to look at a meter of some kind. Okay, now typically these meters are little LED lights. Have you ever seen like a row of LED lights and they're all green and then they turn orange and then they turn red? Anybody have a stereo at home with little blinky lights on it? Or you have a friend with a stereo with blinky lights on it? Anybody? Nobody has blinky lights? Come on, that's half the fun, okay? But you have a meter, and the meter is typically just a row of LEDs, little tiny LED lights, and from here up to about here, these guys are green. Then you've got typically orange, and then you got red, all right? Let's take a wild guess. If you have a full strength, normal audio signal, a full strength, normal audio signal, your meter is going to be full green, popping into that first orange. Full green and popping into that first orange. So an audio signal bounces. It's not, it just doesn't stay there because it's going to be going up and down. It modulates up and down. So as it's modulating up and down, what you want to see is lots of green and maybe an orange. Lots of green and maybe an orange. What if you're getting all the green, all the orange, and some reds? What's that mean? It's not too loud, it's too what? Yeah, it's too strong. So it's strong and weak. Strong and weak. All right? It's too strong. If it's too strong, you run the potential of distortion, and we call that overmodulation. Overmodulation is a signal that is too strong, and it's likely to distort. So if you're getting reds, what's it telling you? It's saying, hey, you're overmodulating. Bring it down. Bring it down. What if you're just getting the bottom three greens? It's too weak. It's too weak, and therefore you are undermodulating, and so you go, oh, look, I only have three greens here. I need to do what? I need to push up the gain or increase the flow. Increase the flow.
Is that like first, before you touch the gain, mess with the flow?
Yeah, you go to your, well, I'll show you in a minute. Before you start, you're going to balance the board, all right? There's a whole pre-production thing called balancing, all right? So you have to use a meter. You can't use your ears. So let's stop for just a second and talk about volume. Let's talk about volume. Volume is a human perception of loudness. Volume is a human perception of loudness. Volume is a human perception of loudness. I can have a very strong signal, and I can turn the volume way down, and you can hardly hear it. Do I still have a full strength signal? Yes. It's just that the volume has been turned down. What if I have a weak signal? Little weak signal. Can I amplify the heck out of it until it blows out your eardrums? Sure. So don't be confused. The only way to know how much signal strength you have is to use your eyes. In fact, if you really think about it, an audio board operator is using their eyes most, not their ears. Yes?
What's the risk of undermodulation if you can still make it loud enough to hear?
You don't want to be applying too much amplification to a undermodulated signal, because what will happen is any noise in that signal is also going to be amplified, and so it's going to wind up, you'll still hear the person talking or whatever, but you're also going to hear like tape hiss. Do you follow that? Was there another question?
You answered it.
I did. Yeah, you don't want to have a weak signal, and then ideally you want everything balanced out, and that's what we're about to talk about. Okay, so before we start the show, I want to balance my incoming flows on every single input. I want microphone number 1 flowing at the exact same signal strength as microphone 2, microphone 3. I want my CD player flowing at the exact same signal strength. And so when you look at your meter, you'll see that there's a way to measure your audio. Okay, so there's lots of different ways that we measure distance: inches, feet, yards, miles, light years. Well, there's different ways that you can measure audio as well. Okay, one of the old school ways of measuring audio is VU. So if you look at a meter and it says VU, it's a volume unit meter. It is a volume unit meter. These were most common in radio, and probably still are. And a VU scale, it's kind of neat. A VU meter actually looks like a gas gauge. It actually looks like a gas gauge. How many of you have ever seen audio meters that have little needles and they bounce like that? It's typically a VU meter. The 0 point is right about there, and then you get like +3, +5, and so forth going this way. Then you get -3, -5, -7. And that needle that's measuring the flow, it's going to be bouncing. It's going to be bouncing. Hey! Hey! Make sense? But what you want is that needle to be averaging at the 0 point. So on a VU scale, you want your audio averaging at the 0 point. So the needle's going to be wagging around like that on both sides of 0. It's going to be wagging around, but you want to kind of get it so that it's averaging out at 0. Make sense? That's the VU scale, volume unit. The more common way of measuring, and there are other ways, there's percent of modulation. That was popular in Europe for a while, but the one that's most commonly used nowadays in digital audio is dB. All right, the dB scale, dB, dB, decibel, scale, the decibel scale, decibel, dB. And the decibel scale begins in the negatives. The decibel scale begins in the negatives and then climbs through 0 and so forth. And your LEDs, your LED lights, are going to be aligned right along the scale. So you'll have all your LED lights along the scale. Does that make sense? And green's going to end, where do you think green's going to end? Is it going to end at 0? Nope. Where? 10? It's right about, you're right, it's right about 10. A full strength decibel signal is minus 20 dB. Minus 20 dB. And you may be saying, why couldn't they just make it 0? Well, I don't know. I didn't design it. Minus 20 dB is a full strength signal. So you'd want to be peaking or averaging minus 20 dB. So is your signal going to be bouncing as high as 0? Yeah. Will it also be bouncing below minus 20? Yeah. But your average is going to be what? Yes. Your average is minus 20. The only way you can tell how much signal strength you have is by using your eyes. You have to look at the meters. So, before I start the show, I will do mic checks. I will do mic checks to make sure that not only are the microphones working, but that the microphones are balanced. Okay? So, if I hook up a microphone to me, I'm pretty loud, right? I'm pretty loud. So what do you think I'm going to have to do up here with my gain? Yeah, you might have to kick me down just a little bit, right? Because another microphone that's hooked up to someone who speaks more softly, what are you going to have to do with them? Yeah, in order to balance us out, you're going to have to kick them up a little bit. Does that make sense? But again, you got to be gentle with the gain knob. Be gentle. You can't just grab that thing and go crank. That would not, you go, the LEDs would probably explode or something on it. But look, one of the things you ought to know though is that microphones, mic sources are actually pretty weak. Mic sources are actually pretty weak from the acquisition point. Sometimes as much as minus 40 dB, minus 50 dB lower than things like CD players. CD players, DDRs, audio servers, and all that other stuff, those are called line sources. Line sources. Pretty much anything that's not a mic is a line source. Line sources tend to be pretty darn strong right from the get-go. Does that make sense? So if I'm trying to balance mic sources and line sources, what do you think is going to be going on with the line sources? Will I have any gain applied? No. So when you look at an audio board, 9 times out of 10, you'll see that the microphones have some gain and all the line sources have no gain. They're just sitting there at 0. All right? But that's what this knob, that's what that's for. All right? That is what that's for. Another button that you'll see sometimes, you'll see another button up here, phantom power. It'll say plus 48 volts, plus 48 volts, phantom power. Yeah, there's a ghost in the machine. microphones, a lot of microphones use batteries. A lot of microphones use batteries, okay? Do batteries go dead? Do batteries always go dead at the most inconvenient time, like right in the middle of a live show? Yes. And so one of the ways that you can get around using a battery is you can actually use the audio board to supply power to the microphone. And what it does is it sends 48 volts back down the grounding line to the microphone, and you can power the microphone remotely. Isn't that cool? And then you don't have to deal with the batteries. You don't have to worry about batteries going dead, et cetera, et cetera. But that's phantom power. That's what phantom power is. What else do you think you're going to see on here? What else might you see?
Processing.
Some processing. Ew, some processing. Well, let's talk about processing. You might have a group of knobs, usually at least 3, but sometimes more than that, and it'll be labeled EQ. What do you think that is? An equalizer. An equalizer. EQ. Equalizer. Okay. What is an equalizer and what does it do? How many of you have an equalizer in your car? You ever mess around with treble and bass? Ever? Treble and bass? It's a 2-channel equalizer. It's a 2-channel equalizer. It's divided the entire range of human hearing in half, the upper half and the lower half. And you can either boost or reduce the responses to those bass signals or the treble signals. So to begin this, that's a very basic example, but let's go to college. What's the range of human hearing in hertz?
20 hertz to 20,000.
Bingo. 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. So let me draw that. Not the whole thing. 20 hertz, 20,000 hertz. 20 hertz, 20,000 hertz. That's the whole range of human hearing. Now, when we were little, we could pretty much probably hear that whole thing. But as you age, what do you think happens? Yeah, it does this. It starts to compress from the top and from the bottom towards the middle. So for example, my hearing is especially shot from all the punk rock concerts that I went to without hearing protection. Seriously, I have really horrible hearing, and I'm in my mid-40s, right? So, but it's pretty terrible. Mine has gone, I can't hear very low or bass signals, and I can't hear really high signals either. Does that make sense? I can only hear the sort of middle averages. But the equalizer in your car is dividing this in half, right? The equalizer in the car divides it in half. Treble, bass. This equalizer over here, how many knobs are on there? 3. So how many divisions do I have? 3. I've got low, mid, and high. Low, mid, and high. But Utterback, you still haven't told us what it does. What happens? Well, an equalizer isolates a group of frequencies. It isolates a group of frequencies and then boosts or reduces the response to those frequencies. An equalizer isolates a group of frequencies and then either boosts or reduces the response to those frequencies. Make sense? That's what an EQ does. Now, we are out of time, but before you take off, how many divisions can we do?
As many as
As many as
you have knobs.
you have knobs. And in fact, there are equalizers, digital equalizers, that can isolate every single frequency. 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. It even gets worse than that. 20.00001, 20.00002. See you Wednesday. Put your chairs up.